Okay, good evening, everyone. It's a great honour and privilege to be spending my Sunday evening speaking with you, Angela. And thank you to the Concordia Forum for setting this up and for you to taking the time to join us for what should be a great chat. So to begin, over the past 6 months, we've had you've been participating in late-night Brexit votes, a cold and wet general election, a long yet successful deputy leadership campaign, and now a global pandemic. Are you tired? What have these past few months been like for you mentally and physically?
I thought that when I was elected in 2015, things couldn't have got any crazier, because if we rewind back in 2015, we had our front bench suddenly went on the back bench. Our backbench, who were a niche sport, ended up on the front bench. And we ended up with the EU referendum result, which nobody expected it to be what it was. My friend within 12 months was assassinated in the UK, Joe Cox, and I was promoted 3 times in about 18 months, and I took on being a whip, and 2 of our great colleagues died in that period. Michael Meacher, the by-election, I oversaw that, and Gerald Kaufman, I was the whip that oversaw that. I became shadow pensions minister when we had the BHS pensions crisis, the single tier state pension and the Tata Steel crisis. They moved me from there into the brief of education, and then we had the biggest reforms to education legislatively wise in a generation, with the higher education and tertiary bill and the green paper on segregation, as I called it, selective education. And I think they just thought it was just a trouble causer. So we had numerous elections after that. Every year, I think we had an election. We had the coup, as we called it, again, where Jeremy was re-elected. And then, like you say, in recent times, we've had global pandemics, a leaked report and everything else. And I think in the last couple of weeks, the only thing that hasn't passed by my desk is murder. Fingers crossed, that's not going to happen.
How do you deal with this then? Like as an individual, I mean, you could quite easily have taken a back seat after all of that, after the election, just sat in the back benches for a few years. How do you get around that kind of stress and motivate yourself to keep picking yourself up and having another go?
Do you know what? I think the only thing that's sort of kept me through is my upbringing was very chaotic. I talk about it a little bit about my background, and I never really felt I had a stable place and felt loved or wanted. So I was quite feral as a child. So life for me was always quite chaotic and quite combative. Even at school, I wasn't considered one of those children that was going to do well. So going into Parliament and it turning into the chaos that it was, actually, I didn't have the privilege of the academic education that others had, or the stable upbringing. So for me, that chaos actually was a place where I thrived quite well, because I was quite used to feeling on edge, feeling a little bit nervous, and so therefore I found it a lot easier to adapt to the situation that I was in. And as a trade union official for a number of years as well, anyone who's been a trade union rep will tell you there's no handbook for it. You just literally get thrown in at the deep end, and I was thrown in at equal pay in local government and health. So we had single status and agenda for change, which was a massive reorganisation, and the branch secretary at the time, it was like the Made in Dagenham film, because I was a home carer, manual worker, and he was like, tick tick, she can come along to the meeting, and then all of a sudden I found myself negotiating with Gordon Brown for capitalisation to fund equal pay in local government. So I kind of got used to being in those circumstances. So I found it and this is going to sound a bit strange, but I found it quite reassuring in the chaos, as in some ways other people found that really stressful.
Cool. So I thought the way we do this is to have a bit of a chat like what we're doing now, and then I'm going to put some questions, which as a keen digital democracy advocate that I am, I've been crowdsourcing, and thank you for retweeting those calls as well. No questions to be scared of, because it's Sunday and even politicians deserve a bit of a break. And then maybe we can take some questions, I think, from the audience. But to start with, global pandemic, you're in opposition, Boris has a massive majority. What role does the Labour Party have to play in this? Tell us what that's been like.
Yeah, thanks. Do you know what? It's been really tough. Especially for me, because I'm a street fighter, so I go in there and, you know, I'm your footballer that puts both, you know, both lots of heels in. I'm like straight in there, rugby tackle or whatever else. So I found this really difficult because one of the things that in opposition you find, and this has been really frustrating from the start, is you have no power to change anything. You can lobby and you can push and embarrass the government into making change, but you really can't do it yourself. And in these times, people don't want you to embarrass the government. People don't want you to take pot shots at the government to bring about change, because they just see that as politicising. They want you to work with the government. And of course, the government are not really that forthcoming on working with us, because obviously they're still trying to mitigate what is an extraordinary circumstance for them. But there's been massive mistakes that have been made. And I'm chomping at the bit to get at them, because as a home carer, I just find the way in which our older people in care homes are literally sat there waiting for death, quite frankly, because the government had this herd immunity strategy, or at least go slow strategy from the start. I'm really struggling because I want to get at them, but obviously the general public want us to be constructive. And there is obviously a time and a place to go at them within that. So I do think we have to try and be as constructive as we can. But I'm really passionate about that day will come when those questions are going to have to be answered as well. And there's still a lot of work for us to do. You know, that we've heard today about doctors having to source their own PPE still. It's just not good enough. You know, British companies having to export goods that will help on the front line because our government is not purchased or procured them from them. These are really challenging issues that we're pushing the government on. But to be honest, it has been challenging for me, more so I think than for Keir, because Keir has been quite forensic and has been a public prosecutor. So I think he's worked in that field before in a way that is less combative. Whereas for me, I just want to get at them because I think what they've done is a real scandal.
Yeah, my brother's a doctor in Scotland, and he's pretty scathing about how the government has been responding. I remember he was particularly angry about the herd immunity comments. But what does that actually mean in terms of, you know, working with the government? Like, is that just constructive criticism? Would you think there should be a national government of unity, that kind of thing? Or what does that actually mean in practice?
I mean, I don't think we should have a government of national unity. I don't think it's required, to be honest. And I think we have to be effective opposition. And I think Keir's done a really good job of that. And actually, Keir's like the guy that's perfect for these times, because if you look at Boris and the way in which Boris, his whole persona and personality as a politician, and almost me to that degree as well, because I'm a bit of a character. It's not quite what people are looking for. They want someone who they consider to be really strong and really forensic and constructive. And Keir is all of those things. So actually, Keir is like the perfect politician to be the leader of our party at this time, I think. Others are probably thinking, come on, Keir, go in there and give him a bit more, you know, and I push him to push a bit more at times as well. But I actually think he's got a really good balance. And there is a time and a place for us to go back to what's happened, especially we can't change what the government did in the early days. We can't change what they decided, but there will be a time and a place for us to ask those really serious questions about why the government chose the path they did. And it's interesting because I watched Gove today do the daily briefing, and there's a line that they keep saying, and that's that this is a new virus, you know, this is a global pandemic. But of course, we knew from the report in 2016 that the government knew that a global pandemic was going to be the biggest threat to us. We knew that what was happening in Italy, we knew what was happening in Wuhan and other areas. We had foresight to deal with these things. So cut the baloney. Yes, it is difficult. I totally understand that it is difficult, but political choices that this government have made have, I believe, added to our death toll and added to our adequacy to deal with this virus. Some people don't want to hear that at the moment, and I totally understand that, but I'm passionate to get to the bottom of that, because I do believe it has put, especially people on the front line, our health workers dying because they haven't had the PPE. Their families deserve answers.
Yeah, but I totally agree. One thing I felt is it seems like the government is still in election mode almost in some of their comms. So take, for example, just framing it like we're in a war and therefore health workers are sacrificing their lives, which I think is not the case. People are I think a lot of these deaths are down to negligence more than sacrifice, like you would have a soldier. But also things like this 100,000 a day test. Like they could have just put their hands up and said, we had a target, we didn't quite meet it, but we're doing a lot of tests. But instead, they've basically fudged the figures on that. Is that something that you get a similar sense of? Do you see it as the government also thinking about the next election as well as just dealing with things now?
Absolutely. I think, I mean, politics is politics regardless of what else is going on. And to be honest, at a time of, if you look at our international work, if you look at our economy, if you look at things like how we deal with a crisis of this magnitude, politics comes into it. You can't hide from that. People keep saying, take the politics out of it, but the politics is right in there. And that's why things happen in the way that they do. That's why New Zealand responded in a different way to how America responded, into a different way on how we respond. So I do think there is an issue around the politics have to be in there, and the government are still playing politics. And it's interesting because if we attack them in the UK Parliament, they go, this is terrible, you shouldn't be attacking us. But if you look at what the Conservatives are doing in Wales to the Welsh Labour government, they're really kicking them, like proper going at them and trying to undermine and attack them. So it's quite interesting the way in which politics is playing out. And then if you look at internationally how different political parties are responding in opposition, it does seem to be that at this moment in time, opposition that seem to go on the attack, very much the public aren't pleased about that. So there is a way in how we go about trying to be constructive at the moment, and I think that's the right approach. But it doesn't mean to say that I'm not incredibly angry and going at them on these issues as well. And anyone who watches my Twitter feed, and in fact, I think me and Alistair Campbell ended up on the wrong side of the media the other week when Boris came back and everyone was saying, isn't it wonderful how Boris has returned? And I said, well, let's see some action first. And I got a load of grief for it. But I just think it's the right thing to do. My instinct tells me if someone's doing something wrong, as a leader, it's my obligation, even when it's not popular, to call it out. And that's one thing I learned from Jeremy Corbyn, actually, is even when everybody else says it's wrong, if you think it's the right thing to do, you should do it. So
talk to us about Keir Starmer then. What's his leadership style like? How is it different to Jeremy Corbyn? And given his initial challenge of the Conservative Party's majority, Brexit, the Red Wall, and now on top of that, this pandemic might also boost support for the government. That makes it much harder for opposition parties to raise any other kind of issue, and like you said, and criticise the government. That is now also something that might lose votes. How do you think Keir Starmer will guide Labour to a victory at the next general election?
I think there's a couple of things, really. He has to learn that, I think one of the things that our party has to recognise is it wasn't just Jeremy Corbyn that cost us the votes. And if anyone thinks that if only we'd got rid of Jeremy Corbyn, we'd have won the election, then they're deluded. The rot in the Labour Party and the problems in the Labour Party was not Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn was a symptom. He was an antidote to some of the issues that people felt around Labour representing them and understanding their views and listening to them. And Keir's got a real job on his hands to connect back with people and to bring the party together. And I genuinely, honestly think that Keir wants to do that. I was as worried and apprehensive as anybody. I didn't want to go back to Magnolia politics. I thought that is going to be really bad, and especially not as deputy leader. Oh, this is going to be terrible. I mean, when I went into Parliament, I thought I was on the naughty step with Dennis Skinner for the rest of my career, and then I got on the front bench, and everything that I did was like I was really happy about. So I don't want to go back to massaging welfare reformers. This has to happen, and austerity. I thought, forget that. And actually, reassuringly, Keir is very much in that space. So I think we've got to be bold on the economy. We can't have business as usual. If we don't continue with the work that John McDonnell was doing around a new economic plan, especially now after what's happened with this global crisis, then I think Labour Party's finished. We've got to be bold and radical on things like that. But we've also got to come together as a party. We can't be factionalising anymore, because if we do that and we fight each other, then people aren't willing to listen to us. And that's difficult because, we do fight a lot, and we do tend to get fixated on our little pet projects in the movement, and sometimes you find it really difficult to see beyond that. And there's a lot of grievances out there. I mean, that leaked report just lays bare the grievances that are in our movement, and as somebody who's been in it a while and on the front bench, I can tell you I've had my fair share of grievances myself, but you've got to put them to one side, because if we keep fighting, we'll never win a general election. So I would say Keir has to reach out, he has to listen, but he has to be bold. So he has to dig himself out of his safe zone and really push forward, and have that credibility as well in the way in which he does it. So working with economists, working with experts to really push that agenda forward. And I think the environment that we're in at the moment allows some of that as well. We could seize the opportunity. I think the next general election will be decided in the next 6 to 12 months. And how we respond and how the government respond to this crisis. And I think that will frame everything going forward for the next general election. So I think it's imperative that we come up with a bold future that people can buy into, that people are excited about what Labour wants to offer, and that we're not stuck in the past.
Yeah, so you've mentioned this leaked Labour report. For those who don't know, this is a report that was done internally, which demonstrated some members of staff, as I understand it, were working to undermine the party at the general election in 2017, I think.
I have a drink, sorry, I'm just drinking coffee.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I feel bad because I know that it's like Ramadan.
No, it's cool. It's absolutely cool.
But
really, it's absolutely fine. Yeah, go for it. So this leaked Labour report, I haven't read it, I've got to be honest with you, I've read like snippets of it. But I understand there's a lot of racism within this report as well to people of colour from staff members in the Labour Party. And you mentioned as well, winning the next election, you need to be a united party, you want to end the factionalism. And straight away you've got to deal with this report. But it also speaks, I think, a bit more widely to the Labour Party's brand in general as an anti-racist party, which for many people, especially people of colour up and down the country, is one of the great appeals of the Labour Party, is that it's an anti-racist party. So what, in your view, do you think the Labour Party needs to do, A, about this report and the members who may have been found to be behaving in a racist manner, but also longer term to really rebrand itself as an anti-racist party and win back that kind of image?
Yeah, I think if you look at what's happened over the last 12 to 18 months, I mean, the anti-Semitism, the racism, and it's not just been in that period, actually, it's been a long time. I mean, as a woman, if you're a woman of colour in the Labour Party, you'll have faced racism and misogynism like literally every other month. I've seen it myself, and I just think we have to be professional and be able to deal with these issues effectively. I think there's almost a blind spot on the left, that if you're a left-wing organisation, you can't harbour racists and, you know, people who have anti-Semitic views. I think there's just been like a bit of a blind spot to that. And as an organisation, we've not dealt with these issues effectively enough and quickly enough. So one of the things that me and Keir was very clear on, and we know there's a lot of anger out there. There was a lot of anger before this leaked report, but actually since that, people, the goodwill that a lot of people felt after the defeat, because it was a catastrophic defeat in December for Labour at the general election, and a lot of people were soul searching, and everybody just wanted to come together to win. People were bruised. We've had years of like in opposition, they really desperately were devastated about not winning. But then if we're not able to get our house in order, if we're not able to show that we can deal with racism, that we can deal with anti-Semitism swiftly, professionally, and with our aims and values, then we're nothing, we're sunk. So it's one of the first things that me and Keir was very clear on, wanting to set that marker down, that line in the sand. And in my speech when I launched to be deputy leader, I said the first line in the sand is racism and anti-Semitism. You cross that line and you're out, end off. There's no education for me. You know, that's the line, educate yourself on that line. And I think unless we're able to demonstrate that, then we're sunk, we stand for nothing. And we've got an independent report, an independent investigation, which the NEC have agreed it this week, and by mid-July we'll have a response from that. We've also told the General Secretary that any action that the party thinks is appropriate, whether that's staff or whether that's through membership, then they take that action. We can't politically interfere with it. This is part of the problem, because this is the problem that Jeremy had. You cannot, as the leader of the Labour Party, politically interfere with the process, because a lot of people are saying we need an independent process. Well, you can't then have an independent process that you then go around saying, I want you to do this, this, this on. So part of unweeding some of that and then dealing with why isn't this being done, and then dealing with that through the appropriate processes has taken far too long. And me and Kay have been very clear that that's got to be dealt with very, very quickly. And it's about culture. The culture in our organisation, it comes back to that thing about if you're on the left, you can't be racist. If you're left wing, you can't be anti-Semitic. And again, there's that culture of not believing the victim or not dealing with it as effectively, and just allowing bad behaviour and mitigating bad behaviour as, oh, well, they're nice people, they couldn't possibly do something that was bad. And I think we've just got to start moving to a professional organisation and a culture that says, actually, we don't accept that. We don't accept any of that in our organisation. If you want to be racist or anti-Semitic, you know, you've got no place in the Labour Party. And I'm determined to root it out. I've fought it all my life. I was working with Hope Not Hate in Oldham when we had the Oldham riots. I'm an Oldham MP. And I had James Goddard and others pointing in my face recently, attacking me on the streets of Oldham when they were trying to make hay out of the EU referendum. And I won't go back to that. And I certainly don't want to see any casual or divert or indirect racism in our party, in our movement. And I'm determined to root it out.
One thing which has been quite depressing to see over the course of this pandemic are the number of BAME people who have been dying as a result of the coronavirus. The doctors, nurses, other key workers. And for many Muslims, this Ramadan will be a very depressing Ramadan. It won't be one for celebration, it'll be one for mourning. And in response to these statistics, the government and Public Health England have appointed Trevor Phillips, who is someone, I understand, is suspended from the Labour Party for racism, and is someone who has long been criticised for Islamophobia by the Muslim Council of Britain and many other leading figures within the community, Muslim and non-Muslim. What is the Labour Party, do you think this is a good appointment? And if not, what do you think the Labour Party should be doing? What is the Labour Party doing to challenge this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a good appointment, because people have raised concerns from the Muslim community about his appointment because of his past comments. And I think the government have appointed him and they have to answer to that, because the most important thing about this inquiry is that it's swift and it has the confidence of people to do the job that it's meant to do. We launched our own inquiry, which we've got Doreen Lawrence, who's chairing that. And I think it's really important that we get to the bottom of the issue and don't lose sight of that. But if people don't have the confidence because of their comments and their views, then I think it's not good and it's not helpful for the government to appoint people to do that role. However well intended they might think it is, I don't think it's responsible. It comes back to my original point about in the Labour Party, if somebody does something like that, you can't then mitigate and say, oh, it's okay, or they've done lots of other nice wonderful things. If it's not acceptable. I do think that there is a really there is a pressing need to deal with this issue about how coronavirus is affecting the Black and minority ethnic communities. I mean, 14 doctors have died, and the 14 doctors that have died have been from the BAME community. I mean, that is quite a shocking statistic, and a third of all people in ICU are from the BAME community, and that's actually quite a significant amount more than the proportion in the general population. So it's pretty clear there's a trend here that's showing that there is a disproportionate impact. Now, whether that's genetic, whether that's social, economic, or some of the other factors, I don't know, but there is certainly a significant issue here that needs to be dealt with, not just long grasped into an inquiry, but needs to be dealt with as a matter of urgency, because people are losing their lives and we can't shy away from that issue. So I'd like to see the government working with the clinicians to see this as a matter of priority. And I know that some of the studies through Oxford University and others have been looking at this particular issue, and we've been pressing the government. I know that Keir, in his meetings with the Prime Minister, pressed it at his last meeting around making sure that the government are seeing this as a huge priority.
So what do you think the government is doing then, therefore, by appointing someone like Trevor Phillips to head up such an important inquiry? Does that scream of a government that's taking it seriously, or is he just well regarded despite being suspended from the Labour Party and despite the criticism that he's received?
I mean, the government will have to answer as to why they decided that they thought he was the appropriate person, given the past comments and given that I don't believe he has the confidence of all of the community that he's meant to be doing the inquiry on behalf of. I think that the government need to reflect on that. You know, I think the most important thing, the government get on and do the job, and they don't want to distract from that by putting someone in the job who some would say is completely unfit to be there. I personally wouldn't have put him in that position. We've got Doreen Lawrence working with us, and I think that's a really good appointment. And I think the government have to answer to that, and they have to answer to why they decided that that was the right thing to do. I personally wouldn't have made that decision.
Okay, so moving on to one of the questions that I crowdsourced. One is on education. So you were a very popular shadow education secretary during your time. One of the big impacts that the virus is going to have is on educational attainment. So there was a report that came out recently from the Sutton Trust, which showed that more private schools are doing online learning courses versus state schools, and therefore the gap between the two during this period could widen even further. And it's not something that is going to last just a few months, but obviously could last years or even a generation, just having 1 year out of education. What do you think should be done to address this issue?
Well, it has a huge impact, and it's funny because some people have said the coronavirus has been the great leveller, you know, on inequality, but it hasn't. It's actually pushed the inequalities and shown the inequalities really stark. And you're absolutely right, the attainment, it's really frightening. One of the first things I did as Shadow Education Secretary, which was strange for me, was support the government in a bill that was going through and a legal case to challenge taking children out of school for holidays during term time. And throughout that whole debate, time after time, all the evidence was showing even 2 weeks off, a child being off, has a significant impact on their attainment, especially children from disadvantaged backgrounds. So this period will have a significant impact for them. So we've been pushing the government. I mean, they couldn't even get the food vouchers right. I'm absolutely petrified. One of the things that kept me awake at night in my brief, and it still haunts me now, is the amount of children that are not necessarily on the at-risk register, but just below that, because getting on the at-risk register or getting to be a child that's considered at need is quite difficult. It's not an easy thing to happen. And there's so many children now that are not going to get the support and are not going to get the health and the education that they need. There's going to be a massive lag in terms of trying to help them along. I do think we have to consider, we've had the Easter holiday and we've had a couple of weeks off now. And we do need to consider about other holidays coming forward if they start to lift the lockdown, and how we can prioritise making sure that the children who need it the most are able to get back into school as quickly as possible when it's safe for them to do so. And I think, you know, the stuff they did around making sure that Ofsted wasn't a priority, and that was really good. We pushed for that, you know, ending SATs and silly things like that, making sure we have post-qualifications admissions. I think that can last. The things that I'd pushed for will really help children from disadvantaged backgrounds. But the government are going to have to come up with a system that allows our young people to catch up and to gain pace. I'm particularly worried about year 10, because the year 10 students now are the ones that will be sitting their exams next year. and they'd normally be doing all of the studying now, and therefore they're not going to be getting that study time in. So there is going to be implications as a result of this coronavirus, and in some ways the students that were not able to sit their exams this year may be in a better situation because they can appeal if they don't get the results they want, and potentially they can push to get predictive grades that are based on an assessment from the teacher, which might work out for them. But the next year, however, they're not going to have that, but they're going to have this lag because they've not been in education at the moment. So the quicker we can get the schools back into education, especially for those disadvantaged children, the better for their welfare as well as their education outcomes.
So anything we can do now, though, so given we don't know how long this lockdown will last for, could we be doing something like distributing laptops to all of these year 10s, broadband vouchers, big ideas on a similar level to the proposals that have been put forward for jobs? It doesn't seem like there's much coming out on that. Does the Labour Party have any policy ideas that could be implemented now that could reduce that impact?
I mean, but just before I left the brief, I was working with Gavin. Well, I was actually working on the DFE. I had access to the top officials because I was literally pushing them along on what I felt they should be doing, especially on the voucher system. But I also had this thing around white space, they called it, which was around, lots of kids have mobile phones these days, but you ask them to use the data on education, they'd tell you to sod off, wouldn't they? They're not going to use the mobile phone data to do educational stuff. So it was about creating space, online space for these young people, and creating laptops and access to mobile devices if they don't have it. And I know a lot of work's gone on. The government have been a bit slow on it, but I know that organisations have done that. So locally it's a bit patchy, but a lot of areas have done some work on that, and schools themselves. I mean, I've got to pay credit to schools because, I was literally having head teachers contact me because they couldn't get hold of the DFE saying, Ange, what should we do? And I'm like, just get on with it. The government aren't going to let you go bankrupt. So just do it and then claim the money back. And luckily, a lot of schools did that. They made sure there was food provision. They made sure that they had schoolwork for the children at home. They purchased laptops if they felt it was necessary for these young people, because schools know their children better than anyone. And the schools have taken control of it a little bit themselves, where the government have failed. And it's testament to them and the teachers, really, that they've done that work. But the government do need that. It's like in everything, they've been really slow to respond to this issue, and it's been really frustrating. So things are starting, the cogs are starting to turn a little bit now, but again, it's just I've seen more go in a sick note than this government. It's just not really got up into its gears. It's not really noticed and seen what's happening. It's like the house is burning around you and they're still thinking that they've got a little tiny fire and they'll put it out. They just haven't been able to respond in the bold way in which they've needed to. But I would say that on schools and students, a lot of the colleges, a lot of the schools have done a tremendous job on providing, especially for those children and pupils that need it the most.
So another question we got was from someone called Ronald on Twitter, and he was a new starter who's been unable to retain his job under the coronavirus job retention scheme, as he wasn't paid through PAYE by the cut-off date on the scheme. And he was very concerned. There's a lot of people in this situation like him who have no support. And Labour, as the party of workers, do you have any ideas on what could be done about this? Are you challenging the government on this? What do you think needs to be done for these workers?
Yeah, I mean, Ed Miliband did a piece, I think it was today in The Guardian, and because he's our new Bays Shadow Secretary, and there is massive, and Annalise Dodds, our Shadow Chancellor, has been working on this massive gaping holes in the furlough scheme as it stands, as well as for small and medium businesses as well, and the support that's offered to them. So we've been pushing for businesses to have 100% guarantee on the loans. I think that's really crucial that happens. And also that there's a medium-term issue. So first of all, we've got to help those that fall out of the furlough scheme currently, and that's like the person who you spoke about, and universal credit is just not fit not fit for purpose, and you know, the delay and the amount of income that it gives to people is absolutely degrading, and people that are in between jobs have found themselves in great difficulty. But the furlough scheme, as it currently states as well, is that medium term, there's going to be a lot of businesses that are not going to come out of this, or will not be in a position where they can support their workers immediately. So the furlough scheme has to be flexible, and there's going to have to be a recognition for more support at the end of that, and potentially transition for people, because even when they come out of that system, even those that are within the furlough scheme, they may not be coming back to the industry that they went into. So we've got to start planning now. And I think, you know, my national education service that I proposed on the lifelong learning, I think the government needs to literally put a rocket up it and do that now. Start doing online open university. Do that while people are at home now, and start looking at how we can transition people into the new technologies or the new industries. And that'll give people hope as well. If you can do some free online learning at a time where we're in this circumstances of lockdown, and you're potentially frightened because the job that you've always done might not be available to you going forward. Why are we wasting this time now? Why don't we give people that opportunity to learn new skills? And I think the government are missing a trick on that, and could really start to rev up some of the new technologies and new industries of the future. And we can assess that now and start developing people for those roles that we need going forward. And I think for people, even like the person that spoke to you about moving from one job to the next and being caught literally right in that middle, having that opportunity to do some free training on a new skill actually during this crisis might actually make them feel a little bit better about that. So I think the government could do more on lifelong learning and free education for people whilst they're currently on lockdown, and that'll help people's mental health as well. But it will also plan for the economy of the future that we know is going to be significantly different, and they're not doing enough to plan on that at the moment. They've just gone, right, furlough, that's it, right, great, let's wait. Actually, you can't do that. There's so much more that you're going to have to do to plan how we move our economy forward in the long term and medium term, because it's going to be significantly difficult for us for a number of years, and we're not going to have austerity Mark 2, I can tell you that. The people of this country should not pay for this crisis again. They've paid enough, and our frontline workers who are low paid, who are the most insecure, have paid a lot over this crisis, and they need to be supported through this, not penalised again.
Another question from my very good friend Tess, who works for a charity called Health Poverty Action, is related to prisoners and the coronavirus. So obviously there's a high risk for prisoners in getting the virus, which means that actually their sentences might end up as death sentences in a worst case scenario. And in particular, her question is about the 1 in 8 prisoners who are incarcerated for drug offences. And her question is whether Labour has, or whether you and Labour Party has any thoughts on following the footsteps of some states in the United States and elsewhere about decriminalisation of drug offences and taking a more public health approach.
I've always had a very public health approach to this problem, and actually if you look at what Scotland did on stuff like knife crime, for example, when they looked at it from a public health perspective, they were able to bring knife crime down and actually support people. And I think the same for drug and alcohol. I come from a social services, adult social care background, so I get quite passionate about it. I think when you criminalise people for an addiction in that way, you're not helping anybody. And there is a particular issue in our justice system at the moment because it isn't fit for purpose and it isn't working, and our prisons are stuffed full of people who are more prone to become criminals when they leave prison than they were when they went in. So we've got to have a system that supports people, that, you know, victims feel that works for them, but also that people who have been victims, and often a lot of prisoners are victims themselves in some way, are supported to rehabilitate and become good members of society again. And in this coronavirus, the government have been, again, slow to act on how they can support prisoners. They've got a duty of care for prisoners, whether some people think you should just lock them away and throw away the key or not. It's not how we work in this country. There's a duty of care for them, and the government have failed in their duty of care. And David Lammy's been really pushing on this since he's took over that role. And you'll know David Lammy's been particularly vexed over the lifetime of his career, really, about black and minority ethnic prisoners and how they're treated in the justice system. So he's got a particular interest to make sure that our justice system is more restorative and looks at a public health approach rather than a criminal approach. And I think that's the right way to go about it. I think the government are failing really badly at the moment, and I know that David's doing a piece of work which hopefully will be pushed forward in the next week or so. Watch this space, but I know that David is very, very passionate about making sure the government do the right thing here, which they're clearly not.
Okay, so we'll have one more question from me, and then we'll go to some of the questions in the chat, which I know some people have been sending. Please keep sending them if you have questions for Angela. So I head up a technology policy think tank. So this question from me. It's about disinformation. So in the last general election, we saw huge amounts of fake news, disinformation campaigns throughout the election, but also from the government. I don't know if you remember the Fact Check UK account on Twitter was quite a notable example, but you also have things like shallow fakes. I was working on a project around deep fakes, which I'm not sure if you know what those are, but they are videos which you can manipulate of individuals in a way similar to Photoshop. And in this pandemic is the real first disinformation pandemic, where you're seeing huge amounts of fake news related to coronavirus, 5G conspiracies. There was a protest just yesterday by people who think the whole thing is made up. And there was a report on the BBC this weekend about the kind of reach that some of these fake news outlets, if you like, are having online, and they're having much greater reach than the likes of websites from the WHO and the NHS. Do you have any thoughts on what is the Labour Party's position on disinformation? Does it have any big ideas about what should be done, or is it just up to the social media companies to deal with?
Well, first of all, the government can stop lying. I mean, they literally, in the general election, you'll know because of the work that you did, that when we were fact checked, we were like completely, everything we said was correct. And then the government, everything that they said, there was just pulled up on loads of things that they were saying in the general election that was untrue. And the thing is when you do that, as politicians, when you blatantly, misread the facts, shall we say, and you're not allowed to say lie in Parliament. You've got to say it was, they were mistaken. You're not allowed to call someone a liar. It's unparliamentary, but they lied. And when you do that as a politician, as somebody with a position of influence, you undermine your credibility. And that's why I was so annoyed with Matt Hancock and him saying that he's got his 100,000 when he clearly hasn't. He'd fudged it, and I think it undermines what we do. So people know that there's fake news out there. People understand that, but I think the problem that we have is where we don't police that, and where we don't have morals that set a standard in terms of our own conduct. I think it just brings everything down. So I would like to see, the social media companies have a huge amount of work to do, not just on the spreading of propaganda, but also on stuff like abuse online and anonymous accounts and things like that. I think it's, there's a lot more that they could do to stop some of that. The amount of bots that I've got now and people that are just literally organised just to make me feel like I shouldn't wake up in the morning is quite scary. I think young politicians globally, people from my background in particular, I really get worried about if they try to put their head above the parapet and to say what, like literally if I speak on social media, I get like, it's like a swarm. And the SNP bots are the worst. You just literally go online, a day to tweet something about Scotland, you'll have literally 400 random accounts like attack you within half an hour. I think there's more that needs to be done about things like that. But the spreading of fake news, I think when you've got people like Donald Trump as the president of the United States, who tells people to, just get a bit of disinfectant and stuff, it's really quite worrying. So it's hard to then tell people to sort out lay people as such when you've got the president of the United States and the prime minister of this country that quite happily use language. Boris has used language that's racist, misogynistic, homophobic, and has blatantly lied, and he gets away with it, and so did the president of the United States. So I think that's what we need to fix first of all, is that politicians shouldn't be allowed to go around lying. Should be sanctions for it.
So we've had a couple of questions in the chat, I think privately, but also in the public one, on Kashmir. So there's a story recently, I think Keir Starmer has repositioned the Labour Party as saying the Kashmir issue is a bilateral issue for Pakistan and India, not one that the rest of the international community should really comment on. And one of the questions was about engaging the grassroots community to back Labour, and how moves like this can actually distance some of the grassroots from the Labour Party. Do you have any views on this? Was there any particular logic behind that position? And shouldn't the Labour Party be speaking out on issues like Kashmir?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'd say that I thought their headline was quite misleading. I was on the call that Keir was on. And they certainly, I mean, Keir Starmer is past as a human rights lawyer. I mean, he's impeccable in terms of his human rights record and what he's fought for all his life. So the idea that suddenly he's going to turn his back on human rights abuses that has been stoked up since around 2007, actually, in the issues in Kashmir, and that suddenly he was just going to be, you know, oh, Modi's all right for his aggressive tone in the way that he's dealing with the issues of Kashmir and his recent announcements on the protection for Kashmir. It's just not true. It's just not true at all. Human rights abuses anywhere has to be called out, and we're an international movement. You know, we're not going to sit by and allow countries to go around flaunting human rights. If we don't stand up for human rights, we stand up for nothing. So it wasn't quite how it was reported, and what Keir was saying is what our long-standing policy has been on Kashmir, and that Pakistan and India has to come together and find a peaceful resolution, that the people of Kashmir should be given the right to self-determination. I mean, that has been our long-standing policy on Kashmir, and I think me certainly, as somebody who has been a proud supporter of standing up for the people of Kashmir, I certainly wouldn't sit on a call and watch Keir Starmer just disregard those issues. But also I think we have to recognise that there has been conflict recently. You know, I think it was 2000, there was an issue in India was attacked, and there was issues between India and Pakistan, and I know the Pakistan Prime Minister did his best to combat that and support that. And what we've got to do, I think, as the United Kingdom Labour Party, is to support a peaceful resolution between India and Pakistan, and that means talking to both sides. But it certainly doesn't mean turning our back on human rights abuses, and that's not what my view of what Keir has said or done in his dealings with this issue. I think it's very sensitive. I think trying to stoke it up is not helpful for anybody, and that actually what we should be doing is pushing for that peaceful resolution and calling out human rights abuses where we see them. But there is no distinction from that. There is no distinction from that at all in what Keir was saying.
So what do you think about the wider question of re-engaging with the grassroots Labour supporters in the north? You know, obviously you're a Northern MP. Many seats went to the Conservative for the first time. But also, you know, many BME people no longer voting for the Labour Party in ways that they used to. How do you, as a party, and I originally as well thought it might be interesting to have a Northern MP just to get around that issue, but kind of changed my mind on that later on. But how do you, as a party, break out from this view of being a London-centric party and re-engage with the grassroots out in the country? And also in Scotland, you mentioned the SNP. Labour will need to win back Scotland if they're to have any chance of forming a government. What is the Labour Party's approach towards that issue as well?
Yeah, I mean, we do have to re-engage, and it's not just, it's interesting because it's not just a north-south divide, actually. There's a divide between the educated people who are getting on and doing well in society and people who are considered not doing so well. So people from my background, I'm considered uneducated. I'm cool with that. I haven't got a formal education. I left school without any qualifications and no GCSE, so I'm cool with that. But I've got a University of Life degree, so I'm happy with that as well. So it's in no way meant as an offence, but there is a divide between what is the working class as I would see it traditionally, and that's from all different faiths and backgrounds as well, by the way, especially in my seat, and the people who are considered to be doing quite well, and what they would consider to be, we call them city dwellers or metropolitans, compared to towns and coastal areas who feel left behind. So there's been a growing divide that's been happening, and it's been happening for a long time, and we've got to start listening to those difficult questions and those difficult challenges that we have. And I think that actually Jeremy was on the right track when he talked about a new economic settlement, because what we did when we was last in government, and it was really good, we did the education, and we, you know, did public sector reforms, and we put investment, but we never changed the economic outcome. We never changed the way in which our economy works in the United Kingdom. We never invested as a state in places where we needed to, because business can't put that level of risk. The state has to put that investment in as well. And if we're looking at new technologies and the new industries of the future, it's a bit risky. So therefore you have to have state investment in that. And we didn't do that work. We went for the low hanging fruit in some of our metropolitan areas, and therefore that divide's got greater. We have to be honest about some of those issues, and we also have to listen to people, listen to their concerns, and start taking that forward. People have felt like really patronised, and it was the same on the Brexit situation in Europe. You know, people felt incredibly patronised. I mean, I said in one of my in my speech when I stood for deputy leader, is we told people to F off and vote Tory, and guess what? They did. And if you treat people like that, that actually you just don't understand what I'm saying to you. And by the way, I felt that a lot of the time as well, that people would say to me, what it is, and you just don't quite understand what we're trying to say to you. That's incredibly patronising. And if we actually start listening and start showing people that we care about them and that we are them. And again, this is an issue with our BAME community. It's like jam tomorrow. You can have, you know, you can be around the table, but you can't be the person that makes the decision. We've got to start opening up our organisation to people of all different backgrounds, so it doesn't look like we're just London centric. And if we're able to do that and be more diverse about the way in which we do stuff, yes, it's difficult, you'll hear things you don't want to hear, but actually you need to hear that voice, and that's the way in which we'll improve and get back into power. But that's the fundamental challenge for the Labour Party, is being ready to listen. Because I think what we've done in the past, we've done it like therapy. Yeah, we know you're upset, but anyway, here's this, instead of actually taking on board what people are saying and doing something about that.
I understand we have Yasmin Qureshi on the call as well, who's a...
I can see her. Hi, Yasmin.
Concordia. Yasmin, do you have a question? And Ben, do you have a question as well?
I know. Well, firstly, I want to congratulate Angela. I think she'd be a fantastic deputy leader of the party, and I know that she's going to do great work. And Angela, I've been involved in Concordia for the last, I don't know, 10 years, but that's over there, 9 years. When I first went to their conference.
That's when you were the first ever member of parliament from any political party to come to Concordia.
Yeah, that was 9
when
years.
we were a tiny organisation.
Yeah.
So thank you for being an early adopter.
Yes, I'm an early adopter and, you know, an early founding member. So it's really good to have you, and I'm so glad you've taken out time to, you know, spend some time with us, and been hearing you. No, I think I just want to obviously congratulate you. I think you've been brilliant. And I just kind of, I mean, everybody's talking about COVID, right? But what do you see the future direction of the country once we're out of COVID? A really boring question here, but, you know, I think...
Oh, no, it's not boring. It's like the one that makes me so excited, because I just think, Yasmin, you know how difficult it's been to cut through on socialist, like a real socialist. Anyone on this call knows me, Jeremy really struggled to cut through. I mean, free Wi-Fi, who'd have thought of it, eh? Now all of a sudden everyone's like talking about giving people free Wi-Fi so they can access the internet and stuff. You know, we were called communists and everything else for even suggesting these things. But I think I've never been more optimistic about changing the country for the better in a more fundamental way, like in a total beverage type way. That's my vision of the future, not just like tweak it around the edges. Like we need this fundamental change in the way that the country operates and what they value. And I think we've really got that opportunity to do this, and we've got to get it right. And I'm coughing now, so apologies.
haven't you? And you've recovered, and
you know what? I'm 6 weeks post-COVID now, and I sound like I smoke 60 caps in a day, but I can clear a room in seconds. I mean, I'm not like contagious or anything, but apparently you still have like your immune response in your lungs. So my lung capacity is still pretty shattered compared to what it was. So now when I cough, like literally everyone's like, I'm like, I'm okay, I'm all right. But yeah, I've still got my cough.
Inshallah, we'll also do dua for you so that you know, recover and get completely 100%. I think there may be others now who might want to ask some questions, but lovely to see you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to see you. And do you know what I've got to say while she's on the call as well, is that the work that Yasmin's done on things like the injustice of the medication that pregnant women were given, these things that a lot of people don't see, they make such a huge difference to those families who feel like nobody's listening to their plight, because it might not be like a big, huge thing. COVID's like a big, huge thing. Everyone knows about it. But the stuff that Yasmin has done to help those families and to support them is just like, she's a little hero for doing it, because most people don't know the lengths that a lot of our MPs go to. MPs like Yasmin, who quietly get on beavering away and finally get recompense and some respect given to those families who need it the most. So hats off to her. She's someone who's mentored me, and I'm incredibly proud to call her a colleague.
So we've got a few minutes left. I've got a couple of closing questions. The first one, both of them are quite quick. First one, which political party do you think will be the first to have a BME Prime Minister? And if it's the Labour Party, who do you think that would be?
It better be the Labour Party. Honestly, it has to be the Labour Party, and it has to be one of our amazing women. We've got so many of them. And in fact, if you look at how many BAME women that we now have as parliamentarians that are coming through, like I couldn't even tell you, there's so many of our women members of parliament of colour who could like literally wipe the floor with any one of the front bench currently on the government side, and probably most of us lot as well. So watch this space. I mean, the one thing that I would say is Jeremy's legacy is the diversity and the talent that we've got in the Parliamentary Labour Party. We've got a long way to go, and we've got to push further. But actually, you watch this space, I think we've got a woman of colour on our benches now who will be the first female black Prime Minister of this country.
Who's that, if I ask?
Oh, I mean, like, there's so many of them now. Honestly, Abida, there's like, you know, Dr. Rosanna Khan, there's Yasmin, there's so many of them. Like, honestly, I literally, Kate Osmer, this, like, literally all of my sisters that are in our movement who are out there. And by the way, they're sick of jam tomorrow. They're not going to be quiet. And I love that. I absolutely love that about them. They are completely empowered, and they're like, now I'm going to tell you exactly what needs to happen. And I think that's really inspiring for the next generation. And I've got to put on record that Diane Abbott has done, regardless of what shade of red you are, she has just trailblazed for a lot of our black women of colour who have come through, because the abuse that Diane Abbott has taken over the years is just absolutely shocking. Absolutely shocking. But I'm telling you, that legacy is coming. I feel it. I feel that revolution on our benches already, and they are not quiet, and they are proper, like, you know, they fought their way into the parliament. They've had to go through so many more hurdles than most of us parliamentarians, and are still finding the casual racism that is around Parliament every single minute of every single day. But they are trailblazing, and I have I am totally confident that one of them will easily be the first female Prime Minister of colour on our Labour bench, and it should be Labour that do it.
All right, so we're coming up to 7 o'clock, which means we're at the end of our hour. Thank you so much, Angela, for taking the time out of your busy life. You're doing a very good job in your new role as deputy leader, and thank you to everyone who's been submitting questions. And yeah,
thank you everyone, and you know, Ramadan Mubarak.
Thank you.
Not that long now. Half an hour, is it? Half an hour.
No, an hour and a half.
Is it an hour and a half you've got left?
Yes. I'd like to chime in and thank you, Angela, on behalf of the Concordia community here. Thank you for taking out time to do this. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll get to do this in person someday in the not too distant future. Areeq, thank you so much for hosting the session. Thank you so much for the wonderful, insightful questions. and you both have been absolutely fantastic.